The rise and fall of Zoroastrianism. The faith that invented heaven, hell, and the devil, then was nearly erased. Let me ask you something strange. Do you believe in heaven? In hell? In a final judgment at the end of time? In angels with names? In a devil? A real, conscious force of evil working against God? Whether you do or you don't, whether you're Christian, Muslim, Jewish, or you haven't stepped inside a religious building since your cousin's wedding, the fact that you even understand those concepts, the fact that they feel like natural questions to ask, that didn't happen by accident. Someone put those ideas into the world, and it wasn't Moses, it wasn't Jesus, it wasn't Muhammad. It was a man most people have never heard of, standing at the edge of a river in Central Asia, 3,500 years ago. His name was Zarathustra. His religion was called Zoroastrianism. And for over 1,000 years, it was the most powerful faith on earth, the official religion of history's greatest empire, the spiritual foundation of kings, the source of ideas that billions of people still carry inside them today without knowing it. And then, it was nearly destroyed. Not in a day, not in one dramatic massacre, but slowly, quietly, over centuries, through conquest, through pressure, through the grinding erosion of a people who were never quite allowed to breathe freely again. Today, there are fewer Zoroastrians alive than there are people in a mid-sized city. But here's the thing that gets me, the thing I can't stop thinking about. They're still here. Their fire is still burning, and it has not gone out for over 1,000 years. This is their story, and I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll never look at world religion the same way again. Part 1. The Man Who Changed Everything. Around 1500 BCE, in the vast, windswept grasslands of what is now Iran or Central Asia, a young priest was standing in a river at dawn. This was a purification ritual, something he'd done dozens of times, completely ordinary. Except this time, something happened. He described a being of light appearing to him on the riverbank, a radiant figure he called Vohu Mana, the good mind. And through this being, he said he was brought directly into the presence of Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord, the one supreme God. His name was Zarathustra, and what he experienced that morning didn't just change his life. It planted a seed that would grow into the spiritual DNA of half the modern world. Here's why that vision was so explosive. In 1500 BCE, everyone was polytheist. Egyptians had hundreds of gods. Greeks had hundreds of gods. The ancient Iranians, Zarathustra's own people, had hundreds of gods. Religion at that time was essentially a negotiation with a very large, very unpredictable, supernatural bureaucracy. You prayed to the rain god when you needed rain. You prayed to the war god before a battle. You kept the whole pantheon happy so they didn't destroy your crops or kill your cattle. Zarathustra walked away from his vision and said something almost no one in the ancient world had dared to say. There is one God, one eternal, uncreated, wholly good intelligence. Everything else bows before him. And that God had an enemy. Not an equal, but a real, deliberate, conscious force of destruction that Zarathustra called Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit, the hostile mind. You know him by another name. You've known him your whole life. You just didn't know where he came from. The battle between Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu, between truth and the lie, between light and darkness, became the engine of Zoroastrian theology. History, in this view, was not circular, not random, not an endless repetition of seasons and sacrifice. History had a direction, a beginning, a middle, and an end, culminating in a final victory of good over evil, a resurrection of the dead, and a judgment of every soul that had ever lived. Heaven, hell, resurrection, judgment day, angels with names, a devil, first articulated, here, by this man. That's not a small thing. Part 2. Fire, Kings, and the Greatest Empire on Earth. Zarathustra didn't become famous overnight. He spent years wandering, rejected by his own tribe, dismissed as a madman, unable to find a single follower. Imagine that. You've just received what you believe is a direct revelation from God. You try to tell people, and everyone looks at you like you've lost your mind. For 10 years, tradition says, he had exactly one convert, his own cousin. But then a local king named Vishtaspa heard him speak, and everything changed. Vishtaspa converted. He gave Zarathustra protection, resources, and a platform, and the faith began to spread. Fast forward about 1,000 years, 550 BCE. A Persian king named Cyrus takes the throne and proceeds to build the largest empire the world has ever seen, stretching from Egypt all the way to the borders of India, the Achaemenid Empire. And it runs on Zoroastrian values. Now, what's remarkable about Cyrus isn't just the size of his empire, it's how he ran it. He didn't massacre conquered peoples. He didn't destroy their temples or mock their gods. When he took Babylon, the most powerful city in the world at that time, he walked in and freed the slaves. He sent exiled peoples back to their homelands. He returned stolen sacred objects to their temples. The Jewish people, who had been held captive in Babylon for generations, were set free by this man. They went home. They rebuilt their temple. And the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, calls Cyrus a Messiah, an anointed one, the only non-Jewish figure in all of Scripture to receive that title. Why was this Persian king so different? Scholars point directly to Zoroastrian ethics, a faith that taught truth, justice, and the inherent dignity of every human being as foundational duties, not optional virtues. And here's where the history gets quietly seismic. During their years in Babylon, Jewish scholars were living inside a world saturated with Zoroastrian thought. And when you read the books of the Hebrew Bible written after that exile, Daniel, Isaiah, parts of Ezekiel, the theology has shifted. Concepts that barely existed before suddenly bloom into full focus. A personal devil as a named, individual being. Angels with specific names and roles. Resurrection of the dead. A cosmic end-times battle. Final judgment. These ideas didn't come from nowhere. They came from sustained contact with the religion of the most powerful empire in the world. And from Judaism, they flowed into Christianity. From Christianity into Islam. 3 faiths, half the population of Earth, carrying Zoroastrian fingerprints they never knew were there. Part 3. The night the fires went out. For over 1,000 years, Zoroastrianism reigned. The Achaemenid Empire, the Parthian Empire, the Sassanid Empire. Dynasty after dynasty, the sacred fire temples burned across Persia. The priests, called magi, tended the flames, performed the rituals, and served as royal advisors. Those same magi, by the way, almost certainly inspired the wise men from the East in the story of Jesus' birth. They were already legendary across the ancient world, mysterious, learned, observers of stars, and guardians of sacred fire. The Zoroastrian sacred fire was not a symbol. It was not a metaphor. It was real. A physical flame consecrated through elaborate ritual that was never, under any circumstances, allowed to go out. Some of these fires had been burning for centuries. Priests worked in rotating shifts. The fire was fed 5 times daily, with prayers and sandalwood. To let it die was not just a ritual failure, it was a cosmic one. Then, in 637 CE, the Arab armies arrived. Fueled by the new force of Islam, They swept across Persia with a speed that shocked the ancient world. The Sassanid Empire, the last great Zoroastrian empire, which had ruled for over 400 years, collapsed within a single generation. Now, the early Islamic conquerors didn't immediately outlaw Zoroastrianism. They classified Zoroastrians as dhimmis, protected peoples, allowed to practice their faith. But they paid extra taxes for that right. They faced legal disadvantages. They couldn't build new temples. They couldn't openly evangelize. And over generations, the pressure did what direct persecution sometimes can't. It wore people down. Conversion became economically rational. Intermarriage blurred boundaries. Children grew up in a world where their faith was tolerated, barely, while another faith surrounded them on every side. The Avestan language, in which the sacred scriptures were written, became inaccessible to ordinary people. The priesthood shrank. The fire temples closed, one by one. And when those fires went out, something was lost that couldn't be recovered. Not just buildings, not just rituals, but living threads of tradition stretching back, unbroken, to the age of the prophet himself. Gone. By the 10th century, a group of Zoroastrians looked around at what was happening and made a decision. They were not going to wait to be erased. They gathered what they could carry, their texts, their rituals, and most importantly, their sacred fire, loaded it onto a fleet of small ships, and sailed south across the Arabian Sea toward India. Imagine that crossing. Families with children. Priests carrying embers in clay vessels, keeping them alive through ocean storms, through weeks at sea. Carrying not just fire, but the last living memory of everything they had been. They landed on the coast of Gujarat. A Hindu king named Jadi Rana agreed to receive them, with conditions. Adopt our language, don't carry weapons, don't try to convert our people. They agreed.
They became the Parsis, the Persians, and in a foreign land, on a foreign shore, they rebuilt everything. If you've made it here, thank you, and genuinely. I don't take it for granted that you gave this story your time. There's a lot competing for your attention, and you chose to spend 15 minutes with a 3,500-year-old religion that most people have never heard of. That means something. If one piece of this stuck with you, the connection to the Abrahamic faiths, Freddie Mercury's Zoroastrian roots, the image of the Parsis crossing the sea with their fire. I'd love to know which one. Drop it in the comments. I read them. And if you know someone who loves history or religion, or just a story about people refusing to give up, send this to them. Not because the algorithm needs it, though it does, but because this community deserves to be known. Their fire has burned for over 1,000 years. The least we can do is talk about it.